While President Wilson fought to reform trust, banking, and America's tariff system, a group of determined women fought diligently to get the vote. Women had played a very active role in the advancements made during the Progressive Era, and the crowning achievement for many of them would be women's suffrage. Prior to Wilson's inauguration, women could vote in federal elections in only 9 western states. The movement had enjoyed some recent successes, however, due to efforts focused on building enthusiasm at the local levels. Across the country, a growing number of college-educated women would breathe new life into the national movement. On both the local and national levels, a variety of strategies were used to spread the message of women's suffrage. Grassroots groups employed the tactic of going door to door to recruit potential supporters. In a very short period of time, what had once been a movement made up mostly of educated, wealthy women found interest amongst poor and working class women. As the movement gained momentum, parades, protests, and public speeches became common. Oftentimes, crowds would gather and listen to suffragist arguments, not out of sympathy or agreement, but because it was such an unusual event to see women speaking in public. The women's suffrage movement gained another boost from an outspoken group of women who had traveled to Europe as part of their education. While visiting England, many women became involved in the suffrage movement in Britain. British suffragists were known for using exceptionally bold tactics, such as hunger strikes, heckling politicians, and spitting on policemen. Some suffragists began urging American women to use similar approaches. The argument over tactics caused a split within the women's suffrage movement. Carrie Chapman Catt, Susan B. Anthony's successor as president of the National American Women's Suffrage Association, emphasized cautious lobbying and good-natured, ladylike behavior. Others, such as Lucy Burns and Alice Paul, believed that a more radical approach was needed. Together, Burns and Paul founded the National Woman's Party to pressure the federal government directly. While President Wilson occupied the White House, Paul led a group of her followers in a round-the-clock picket line outside the presidential mansion. Wilson, who favored suffrage at the state level, hesitated pushing for it federally out of fear of dividing his own party. Known as the Silent Sentinels, the constant presence of suffragists outside the White House gates was designed to force Wilson to publicly call for Congress to act. The picketing lasted from January 1917 until June of 1919. While the picketers were tolerated at first, U.S. entry into World War I brought on strong criticism from government officials and much of the American public. The actions of the Silent Sentinels were seen as unpatriotic, and clashes with the police became frequent and sometimes violent. Picketers were often arrested. Many, including Alice Paul, went on hunger strikes while in jail. Paul was force-fed as a consequence. Ironically, while the war in Europe hurt public support for the Silent Sentinels, it certainly helped their cause. During the war, women rushed to work in factories, building weapons and equipment for American soldiers. Women filled countless positions vacated by men who joined or were drafted into the military. Women sold war bonds, made uniforms for soldiers, planted victory gardens, and raised children on their own while their husbands were away. After the war, the support for suffrage swelled to levels never seen before. A growing number of supporters claimed that women were due the ballot as a reward. Congress responded by passing the 19th Amendment in 1919. In August of 1920, Tennessee became the 36th state to ratify the amendment, giving it the necessary votes needed to become law. 72 years after the Seneca Falls Convention first called for women's suffrage, the dream had finally become a reality.